you know.
But for me, you're as interesting as Rogan, I suppose. I mean, I'm 23. I was a young man when I read your books. You know, you may have guessed, but I think you changed my life in a way in terms of what the advice that you were giving, as I said, I find individuals fascinating. So I want to ask a question about you for a moment. Since 2016, how do you think your life has changed? How do you think you have changed? How has your outlook towards the world changed?
Well, my life was flipped upside down in many ways because I had to give up my professorship and my research enterprise, and I'd put a lot of time and effort into those, and I liked doing them, and I was good at it. And particularly the research enterprise collapsed entirely. Now, I've been able to duplicate the teaching enterprise on a much broader scale, and that's been extraordinarily useful and fulfilling and much better. So there's no net loss there. But the research enterprise, that was a real loss. And then my clinical practice became impossible too. And that really still irritates the hell out of me because I knew those people extremely well. And we were getting places. You know, we had a real relationship, sometimes one that had lasted a decade. And it just blew up. Plus, you know, the College of Psychologists has been on my case ever since 2016, and they're costing me $90,000 a month in legal bills, which I'm also not very impressed by. And every single allegation they've brought against me is not only unwarranted, but absurd and procedurally incompetent to a degree that's almost unimaginable. So that was annoying. There were a lot of harrowing experiences that went along with what's unfolded over the last 7 years, particularly in the first 4 or 5 years, because every week, month, something like that, there'd be some new scandal, generally fulminated by some journalist who was narcissistic, whose sole goal in interview was to trap me into saying something that would demolish my reputation to their renown. And every time that happened, things were unstable for weeks or months even, but it reversed. And now we've learned that it reverses. So it's much less worrisome now. And so that's one thing. That's one way I'm different, is that I know now that if you're careful and you get attacked and you hold fast, that the net outcome will be positive if you can tolerate the intermediary disruption. So that's a very useful thing to know. So now if, you know, someone scurrilous says something potentially reputation devastating, my family has learned just to watch and wait and watch it flip around. Because it's the case that the people who went after me most pathologically did me the most good. And that isn't something, I didn't know that. I didn't know that's how the world worked. That's part of the reason why you can welcome assault. You know, because you need to know what your attitude is, right? You need to know what your attitude is towards tragedy. And your attitude towards tragedy is that you should bear it with hope. Because, well, what else are you going to do? You're going to descend into the pit of victimhood? I mean, even if the world has been stacked up unfairly on top of you, well, construing yourself as a helpless victim and becoming bitter and resentful, and then murderous and then genocidal, that's not helpful. It just turns tragedy into hell. So you're called upon to maintain faith and hope in the face of the existential catastrophe of existence. And then with regards to malevolence, it's, well, you know, do you embrace your enemy? I suppose if you were a master, you could do that.
So there are advantages of suffering.
There are ways of making it a hell of a lot worse than it has to be, at least. You know, advantages of suffering, that's a tough one. You know, I was very, very ill and in a level of pain that I didn't even know was possible for like 2.5 years.
And we're talking about a physical illness for people who aren't aware of your...
Yeah. And at any point during that time, if there would have been an off switch, I would have just flicked it. And, you know, you could say, well, did you learn anything? And the answer is yes. But I would also say, I think I could have learned it in less than 2.5 years. You know, I'm very leery of saying suffering justifies itself in the wisdom that it produces. I think there are wise and unwise ways of responding to suffering, and I think that it can take you down a peg or two and force you to recalibrate. But I think you have to be cautious in making the hard and fast rule that, you know, all suffering redounds to our benefit.
Do you feel you've become more cynical and pessimistic about the world, if that was possible?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I'm more struck dumb by amazement with regards to the depths of malevolent stupidity that are possible. The comical malevolent stupidity is a never-ending source of like surreal amazement. But, you know, by the same token, I've met some great people who are doing great things. And I don't think falsehood can triumph over truth. So I'm not pessimistic at all, or I'm not more pessimistic. I mean, I've always had a rather dark view of things. I mean, I studied atrocity for decades before anything blew up around me on the political scene, you know, and we could talk about that for a bit too. I mean, you know, people sometimes tell me, you know, they laud me in relationship to my bravery. And I don't really appreciate that in some ways. It's not like I take offense to it. That isn't what I mean. I just don't think it's right. It's like when Bill C-16 came up, people wondered why I made such a big deal out of it. And the reason for me, well, first of all, I knew what it was going to do, and it's done exactly what I knew it would do in the detail. I knew it would produce a psychological epidemic. I said that to the Senate. I could see it just as clearly as could be. And I knew that it was part and parcel of the process of the restriction of speech. And so those were the grounds on which I objected to it. And you say, well, why did I object to it? And the answer is, I'm way more afraid of losing my tongue to the tyrant than of anything the government or the woke radicals could possibly do to me, because I know how people get corrupted. And if you have any sense at all, if you know how people get corrupted, you'll be way more afraid of that than anything else. And so for me, it's, well, why do I say what I think? Because I know that the alternative is hell. And it's not like I think that. I know that. Like, I know it as much as you could possibly know anything. I watched that in my clinical practice for decades. I saw it unfold in my personal life in all sorts of ways. I see it work in the political world. You lie at your peril. You have no idea what you'll pay for that. And what everyone else will too. It isn't just that you take yourself to hell, as you drag everyone along with you. Not good. Not good.
As individuals, we all have to make choices about what we talk about, obviously online, for example. And I may have opinions that I can't share because, let's say, I would lose my job, or I would be arrested, or I would get completely cancelled. So is that me lying by not revealing certain opinions that I have? Or am I just being practical?
Well, you don't
and
have to say
strategic?
what you think about absolutely everything every second. You have a right to privacy, and it's reasonable to be discreet. I don't think you should make unnecessary enemies, you know? And then after that, well, it's reasonable to be discreet. If you falsify what you believe explicitly, that's a big mistake. Like, I would say, you can make a blanket, you can just lay a blanket prohibition over that. Do not lie. And I could define that. Do not say things that you know according to your own standards of truth are false. Right? That circumvents all the moral relativistic arguments. It's like everyone knows the difference between saying something they believe to be true and something they know to be false. Okay, so don't do that. Now, there's going to be edge cases when you don't know. It's like, well, maybe those are places you should, explore carefully or just shut the hell up about. And then there's the more complex situations where you could say something, but you believe that it might be unwise under the circumstances. And I would say, well, those are very complex moral cases. So you might say, well, look, I'm a teacher and I can't oppose the school board because I have 4 kids and my wife stays at home and we're solely dependent on my income. So it's the duty I owe my wife and my children compared to the duty I owe my profession and my society. And that's a real conflict of duty. It's a genuine conflict of duty. And the ethical pathway forward is not crystal clear in the manner that someone could specify from the outside. Okay, so if I have someone like that in my clinical practice, I say, well, look, you're going to be called upon to make very fine moral judgments. So you better make yourself into the person that can do that. And how do you do that? Well, you do that, first of all, by ceasing lying, right? Because then you sharpen your vision, and then you'll be able to be in a situation where you can decide in a given circumstance which pathway forward is the most appropriate morally. Now, part of the reason, this is a crucial point, is that part of the reason that you should be careful with what you say is because, well, there's no difference between speaking and thinking. And if you muddy the conceptual waters and you find yourself in a tight spot, you'll be too blind to think. And then you'll be in trouble. And, and not just the sort of trouble that can cause death, that trouble too, but worse. So if you know that, and you've thought that through, it's like, oh, I see, I can't lie because if I lie, I falsify the process that enables me to abide by the truth. When the challenge arises, you think, oh, that seems rather self-evident. I should be careful because, or else. And I know that. I know that. And I also know that if you are careful with what you say, especially that you don't lie, but also that you practice saying what you have to say when the time is right, then your vision gets sharper and the world improves around you and the opportunities multiply and everything works out for you much better, even though it's complex, and for everyone else much better. That's how the world works.